Good morning. Welcome to Help the Helpers. And we have a special treat this morning, and I can't wait. I woke up very excited. Um, Barbara Dickinson is going to share with us her memoir about Jane Gendlin. And we're going to get to hear some new things, I think, because we've heard. Some of you knew Gene, some of you know his work intimately, and it's always such fun to experience his people, you know. Um, so we're going to have a wonderful time. And Barbara, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us about Gene during his season. I think of the Christmas season as Gene's season. Welcome.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, team Help for Helpers. This is a great honor, and I'm not going to stop smiling the whole time because I'm seeing so many friends on the screen. I can't even shout you all out. I think a couple of things it's important to say at the outset. It took me 12 years to write this memoir, and a great deal of focusing and ruminating and a lot of editing. You're going to hear something at the end that is absolutely precious to me because the poem for this session was written by the person that made this memoir possible. She is my friend, my muse, my mentor, my favorite poet, and my editor.
Oh, wow.
Which might not be my favorite because she was really good at helping me make this possible. So the other fun thing to say is the two things that Gene and I never talked about were the field of philosophy and the field of psychology. And so I don't really want to make that a caveat at the beginning of this talk because it turns out I do have opinions in those fields. But I'm not a philosopher and I'm not a psychologist, as many of you are. And my role with Gene was this much more practical, how to get business done, how to work with organizations and people. And that's what I'm delighted to share with you is how it was for me working on those things with him. And the last thing I want to say to Lynn's earlier point, I did spend a lot of time with Gene in person in his home. I didn't spend anywhere near that amount of time with Mary. She would kind of float in and out. She would ask me certain things. In my life, it's typical that people will ask me things I probably shouldn't know anything about, but it turns out I do. She had legal questions, and they had some financial business that they wanted help with. And it was amazing to be able to work with them on all of those different levels. So what I propose to do today is actually share my memoir with you, is to read some excerpts and, offer you an opportunity to ask questions if you want to, with the understanding that if you ask me questions about philosophy or psychology, it could be hit or miss. And then I have an offering for a breakout room that has to do with what was nearest and dearest to Gene's heart while I was with him. And that was how to spread focusing as widely as we possibly can. So I came up with some questions for you to take in and then go into breakout rooms and be with one another and see what comes. I think what comes from those questions will have a lot to carry forward. And hopefully there will be an opportunity to do more with that. And so that's kind of how we're going to spend our time. And I guess what I would like to do is start by reading one of the excerpts, which is entitled, How I Came to Work with the Gendlins. When I first met Gene, I was in awe of him. the little contact I had with him individually was not really enough to form a more extensive opinion until I was asked by a member of the board of directors of TFI, as it was known then, to draft a strategic plan for the Institute. That assignment brought me into direct contact with prominent members of the focusing community, especially Gene, his wife Mary, and members of the board. The results of my work are published on the website of the International Focusing Institute for those interested in knowing more. After I completed my board assignment, Gene asked me if I would continue working with him and his wife because, as he said, I do not know anyone who thinks like you. He found my way of thinking and expressing myself to be unique, which is one of my favorite compliments. I was honored that Gene and Mary asked and embarked on a bit more than a year of interactions with them. It turned out that Gene was looking for someone, and he chose me in that moment, to hear his ideas about bringing focusing to people and organizations that had never heard of it. He especially wanted people with a penchant for implementation to bring his ideas to fruition. While that had been a hallmark of my career, I had no idea what was in store when we began these discussions. Gene's ideas about so many things were brilliant. His ideas about how people functioned in organizations, however, did not match what my experience had taught me. What was missing, it seemed to me, was hands-on experience managing people to achieve the desired outcomes. He never spoke of any observations of how people reacted or interacted when placed in a variety of typical project management instances. At least if he had such experience, it was not evident in my time with him. He believed in people at their best in a lot of ways, but he wanted someone, me, with the knowledge, skills, and experience to implement his decisions about which people should accomplish desired outcomes together. At least that was what he hoped I would accomplish. On the other hand, I thought I was signing up to give advice as a consultant, not to implement multiple disparate projects. There were three main topics we covered in our conversations that ensued once a week, typically on a Sunday afternoon for about 3 hours. The first topic was what Gene called his project for projects. That's described later in the memoir. Besides philosophy and psychology, Gene was fascinated with economics, organizational behavior, and something that might be called marketing plus, the process by which one presents one's creation to the people who will be interested enough to invest in it financially. The third topic was repair and maintenance of their finances, their home, and to some extent their daily living. These private details were discussed at length, but will remain confidential. So I will stop there and ask if anybody would like to ask a question or a clarification. That's probably the longest excerpt I'll read, so if you were getting to the edge of your patience, it won't be that bad.
I just want to say I can just picture what that was like and picture Gene. I love the way that you portrayed it. It's very alive, and it feels it sort of feels very familiar to me, that feeling of being with him and in his house and all these brilliant projects and all these problems and a kind of combination or interweaving of naivete and astounding brilliance.
Oh, I love that combination. That says it perfectly. He would often, I would say something to him and he'd say, "Really? I've never heard of that." And I remember thinking, no, that can't be true. You know everything. How can you not have heard of that? Castle, I see you have your hand raised, and I'll come to you in a minute, but I want to say, I'd like to paint a little bit of a picture. Gene had this red overstuffed easy chair, and it sat out on the porch. And he had a little table next to it. And some of you probably know he smoked. And so, but he didn't smoke in the house, apparently. And so when we focused, that was where we did it, out on the porch on this about 8 foot by 8 foot front of the house. And Gene would sit there sort of slouched in his easy chair with his cigarette. And I would sit there very proper, sitting up straight in a folding chair. And that was where we would do our focusing. And then when we were talking about his projects, we were in the living room. And the living room, as I remember it, was kind of a sea of yellow legal pad pages.
Yes.
All over the place. And every once in a while, he would say to me, I can't get these organized. Can you help me organize them? But we would last maybe 10 minutes on that before he would be off on another topic and we would be discussing something else and I would be taking notes. And so we never did get to a place where the sea of yellow papers was organized. Castle, you wanted to say something?
Hi, Barbara. Nice to see you, and nice to see you, Lynn.
Yes.
When I read, Katerina sent your paper, and so I read it, and then as you were reading it today, I thought, I hate to use a label, but it's a perfect description of someone with ADHD. Oh, absolutely perfect. And I know it for myself. I am the same way. All those legal pads have papers everywhere. I have that same, overabundance of things I would like to put into the world, but inability to carry them forth, and absolute awe of people who can do it, like he had with you. I mean, I'm like, oh, this is great.
Good morning, everybody. It's BJ. Thank you, Cassell, for doing a little official welcome. Barbara, thank you so much for making this a public document for us. In so many ways, I see dovetails with Lynn's current work and that yearning to bring, Lynn, excuse me if this isn't correct, but a kind of a third leg to the three-legged stool of Gene's work, from the understanding single person focusing to dyadic focusing, and then to somehow add that third leg of the world, of a group, of something, so that then focusing had something to stand on, something flat to stand on. And for you, Barbara, I want to ask, the words that came to me were visionary, that Gene was a visionary, and he saw in you a kind of a real world acumen that he needed. Could you say more about that?
It's a wonderful question. Somewhere in the memoir, I mentioned that he and I had a conversation about different personality assessments. And the one that elicited the funny comment from Gene was the Myers-Briggs. He claimed he didn't know anything about it. I choose to believe him. And so I described it to him. It's something I'm trained in. So I gave him the basics, and I said it breaks the human personality down into 16 different sort of buckets. And he laughed out loud and basically said something to the effect of, what hubris to think that we could reduce the human personality and all of its complexity to 16 buckets. and Myers and Briggs and all that went into it was dismissed with one wave of his hand. But I also work with the Gallup strengths philosophy, and my strengths are almost all in the area of thinking and visioning and things like that. And I got in trouble at work because I was always painting pictures of a future as if it existed today. And I think that Gene and I had that in common, because we could spin stories about what would happen if we brought focusing to the New Jersey Education Association Union of Teachers, and how we would get 200,000 people interested in focusing, and they would take it back to their schools, and everybody in New Jersey would learn focusing. I live in New Jersey. That's why we use that state. It hasn't happened, and it's not because I didn't try. It turns out it's a lot more complicated, and it requires a bigger team than me. But yes, you're absolutely right. Gene saw the future, and he saw it in detail, and he saw it in technicolor, and he lived in a tremendous amount of frustration because it couldn't become real in front of him in his time. And I think, I mean, one of the things I know about Gene is he collected people. Many of them are on the screen today. I see people that work directly with Gene and that know this about him. He was the most incredible connector of people. And he always had more than one person. It was not just me. There were, I would guess, at least 6 people besides me working directly with him at the time I was there. And so I hypothesized that it was usually that way for Gene. I kind of wish we could form an alumni association and get together and share our experiences to paint a more complete picture, because there is no biography of Gene that really gets to the heart of the man for all of us to share, at least not that I know of. I hope that answered, and BJ left, so. Okay, any more questions or comments?
I just wanted to say I wasn't putting him down by saying that I thought he had ADHD. I think Einstein did too.
Yeah, yeah, so I didn't get a chance to answer. What you said matched my experience perfectly, and the probably the issue is that I have a similar brain, so the two of us could go off on tangents in a heartbeat. But I think what I said about Gene partnering with people was his brilliant answer. I think he may have known somehow that about his brain, and he got people to help him, which is one of the best ADHD strategies there is. Yeah. Okay, so if we're finished with questions and comments, I have more excerpts. If you get tired of hearing me read, please let me know, but part of my mission here was to share my memoir. So,
Absolutely.
So the second excerpt I have is the lessons I learned from Gene. And there's a little introduction to it, and then there's 2 or 3 of the specific lessons. No doubt, Gene Gendlin was a brilliant thinker, philosopher, professor, presenter, writer, therapist, teacher, guide, humorist, and much, much more. How he developed all that out of what he lived, from Nazi occupation of his native Austria, flight to the US, education, 2 marriages, 3 children, professorship in a major university, founder of an institute, and leader of a movement would be an astonishing story. Gene is famous among philosophers and their students for his groundbreaking philosophy of the implicit. The idea that everything is implicit seems to me how he came to understand so deeply the human process of focusing. He said, early and often, that focusing is not something anyone developed or invented. It's a natural process all humans do from birth. We come into this world with an inherent understanding that something is implied in every moment of living. Think about a baby. Crying is implied by a hunger pang, or feeling cold, or wet, or left alone too long. Even more fundamentally, exhaling is implied by inhaling, and so on. Gene's understanding of this and his way of communicating it to the rest of us are his enduring gifts to humanity. Everything else seems to flow from there, at least for me. What follows are all the gems Gene offered during our time together. Some of them are well known in the global focusing community, while some of them may only have been heard by me. Either way, I'd like to share them here, both for posterity and to paint the most complete picture I can from my time with Gene. I know that in this audience, everything I just said is pretty well known, but I wanted to emphasize it anyway, because I very much want Gene to be understood by people who don't know focusing and don't know his philosophy. And so I hope that some of what I've written in this memoir does that job of opening it up to people who aren't part of our community, who aren't already students of his philosophy. I'll go on and read the first lesson, and then I'll pause for questions. This one is called Write Everything, and then on writing, Gene said, write everything you want to write, and then go back and take out every word you don't absolutely need to make your point. This is wisdom he conveyed to many, not just me, but it has stood me in good stead ever since I first heard him say it. I sometimes wonder if he used this wisdom in his own writing. It seems a heavy responsibility for a philosopher, someone who writes about complex, sometimes obscure, often esoteric topics. I've also noticed that for fiction writers, it is not necessarily the wisdom they should follow. They're writing for mood, sometimes nuance or foreshadowing, sometimes in the idiom of a particular period. I could edit out many unnecessary words, but the spirit, mood, or undercurrent of the piece could be ruined. However, in business writing, research writing, ordinary correspondence, or anything for which understanding on the part of the reader is crucial, this wisdom is pure gold. And I'll pause there. And I wonder if any of you have anything to say about that, if you've ever heard that before, especially from Gene.
Wow. And the elements of style, struck and voice, they omit needless words.
Ah, so it wasn't original Gendlin then.
I don't know if we've got it from Strunk and White or not, but yeah.
Okay, thanks, Charles. Well, it leads directly into the next one. And this is not one where he was conveying wisdom to me. He was yelling at me. One of the things that Gene was brilliant at, among the many, was connecting people. And of course, because he was Gene, people were trying to connect with him all the time. I don't really have a sense of the volume of emails, but I know that people were writing to him on a regular basis. They wanted to talk to him about one thing or another. And one of the things it turned out, I didn't sign up for this, but it was what he wanted me to do, was that he wanted me to reach out to some of these people and have a conversation with them. Let me read the excerpt. Your emails are too long. Just write, I want to connect with you. This is something he said to me in considerable frustration about how long it took me to write emails. I wanted to explain why I was connecting, when all he wanted was to connect with people now. And he was right. I have employed his wisdom over the years since, and it has helped me make connections easily, quickly, and effectively where I used to agonize, sometimes for days, weeks, or even months over what to write. And there's one little story I'll tell. There was someone who contacted him, and he never told me why, which I'm not sure he always knew why. I think maybe people wrote to him and said, I want to connect with you. And he said, go connect with this guy. But it was towards the end of our time, and I never got a chance to do it. Probably 2 years later, I was looking at an invitation from, I think it was the New Jersey Human Resource Planning Group that I had belonged to while I was employed. And I had one last ticket, and they had this event, and it was about teaching mindfulness to executive leadership. And I thought, oh, how fascinating. I think I'll go. And I looked at the picture of the guy that was going to talk, and I read his bio. Oh, isn't that interesting? So I went to this hotel not far from here, and it was before the speaker was going to begin, and I was looking for the coffee cart, and somebody pointed me over there, and I turned around and I walked right into the speaker. Literally bumped into him, stepped back, and I said, "Oh, I know who you are." And he said, "Well, who are you?" And I didn't usually do this because of the job that I had, but now that I wasn't in that job anymore, for the first time in forever, I said, I do this thing called focusing. And I had this cute little elevator speech to give him about focusing, but he burst out laughing, which was unexpected. So I sort of stopped my elevator speech and I said, "Why are you laughing?" He said, "Well, if you sit down and listen, about halfway through, you're going to hear me talk about teaching focusing to executives." He and I, and so he did exactly that. And in the middle of his talk, he stopped and he said, "Did I get that right, Barbara?" And in front of 40 people, I got to say what I thought focusing was, which worked. He and I went on to form an association for a few years. We sort of peer coached each other. He is a professor of leadership at Claremont College in California. He's well known in certain circles. He's got TED Talks and YouTubes out there. His name is Jeremy Hunter. And that was one of my best stories of connecting with somebody that Gene wanted me to connect with, and it didn't even happen while I was meeting with Gene directly. So I'll just pause if anybody wants to comment there or has a question. Dorothy? You're muted.
I have a question that might be very elementary, but I'm not a long-time focuser, and I always wondered what it is about, like Gene discovering the implicit. I never quite understood that aspect. It seems like the implicit is could be a primary way of thinking. Like, I think self-psychologists use it a lot. I remember Lynn writing a paper on it many years ago. And could you just help me unpack that a little bit? Because when I went to study focusing 2 years ago, that was like the basic piece. It came up over and over again and like in every lecture. And I just want to get a better understanding of, it's like, not to discredit in any way, I just don't understand that, like, Gene is the founder of the implicit, is what comes across. Does that make sense? Does the question make sense?
Your question makes a lot of sense to me. I think I have the same one, and I have to say there's at least one person, if not two or three on the screen, that know a lot more than I do. And I wonder if there's somebody here who would like to comment on Dorothy's question. Charles, please.
The way I understand it is nothing just is. There's always more. There's a more. And the more is what's implicit in the is. So you in this moment are here, Dorothy, but there's more to you. And that more is coming all the time. So there's an implying of that more that is unfolding and can continue to unfold. And so that we don't, because Gene hated the word is. It's static. It doesn't move. It doesn't grow. It doesn't develop. So the implicit is the forward movement that is coming and wants to live and go forward. That's my best explanation.
Charles, did you say Gene hated the word is, I-S?
Yes.
Okay.
He said, I think he called it, didn't he call it a dirty word?
Yeah, I could tell that story. It fits right with what you're saying, Charles. I used to go and visit Jane with my partner Ellen, and she was in the kitchen making, uh, setting up bagels and lox that Jean loved, and Jean was uh, all into the class he had just done um, with Anne Weiser Cornell, and he said that one of the students had said that you that focusing that you oh, what was it, that you have to have, for focusing to be complete, you have to have an action step. Um, and Jean was saying, yes, an action step is important, but that you should have it is a bad word. And I said, oh, I know what you mean. That, and then we got into this silly thing of saying to each other all the bad words, like entitled is a bad word. All of the words that have a kind of oppression in them. And then he said, well, is a bad word. And just then my partner walks in and we're laughing together. And she said, what is wrong with you people? But is, for Jean, is that everything is becoming, nothing is, in the sense that it just,
Or nothing just is, right?
nothing just is, yes.
Dorothy?
You can't say a person is a borderline. I mean, Jean thought that was the most, these diagnostic things were silly and destructive, because nobody is a borderline. They may experience some of the troubles that are grouped in this category, but you aren't anything that's this thing.
Wow. Dorothy, I'm imagining your question was well and truly answered.
Yes, I really appreciate the answers, and it has my mind going. And my personality is like around, there's always something that I don't grasp, and I'm not going to get it. I'm just not going to get it. And breaking it down this way, it's very helpful. It's like a child with these simple questions that they ask over and over again. And there's something developmental about the whole process.
Oh, yes.
I appreciate this conversation.
Wonderful.
We're all children of the implicit.
Mm.
Like in the Seder, asking the questions.
All right, I have one more of the small lessons to read to you, and then the big lesson. This small lesson, I know that he didn't hear this from anybody else, and that I don't know if he ever shared it afterwards. I doubt it, but it's called "Your Facts and My Facts Do Not Match." I once said to Jean, "Your facts and my facts do not match." This is something a coach taught me. Jean expressed astonishment at the simplicity of this and said, if I had known that 20 years ago, relationships could have been entirely different. I was using this concept in interactions about business, but he also applied it to personal relationships, something that had not yet dawned on me. I can assure you, I use it in all relationships now. I do not know if Jean ever used this aphorism again, but I use it all the time and commend it to anyone who needs to find common ground with another person. It honors the notion that we cannot convince another person to abandon falsehoods until we acknowledge that they have as much right to the chokehold they have on what they consider to be facts as we have to our chokehold on what may or may not be verifiable facts. The two processes are different and separate. How tightly I hold my facts versus whether they are verifiable facts needs a different approach to reach forward motion in life. Otherwise, it is a war of opinion, which cannot be won typically without violence. I give a deep bow to focusing for helping me to learn these truths and figure out what to do about them in my daily life. I'll pause there for a comment before I move on to the big lesson. What comes, Lynn?
Oh, I think that's beautiful. Donata Schuler said in one of her talks, and she didn't say a lot about it, and I want to connect with her and ask her, but she said that she felt that we were in a post-factual era. And not that there aren't any facts, but that there are infinite facts, and our stories of what is and what's becoming are how we connect those, like the Big Dipper. And there's something very important about really looking at the whole issue of facts and how we rely on them to prove our reality.
Wow. Yes. I think you'll like the next excerpt too.
Barbara, I wanted to say, it sounds to me, it might sound like that's the end of a conversation, but I think it's the beginning.
Yes.
Can you say more, Charles?
Well, if I say my facts and yours differ, that could be like, okay, let's agree to disagree. But if we say, well, our facts differ, I wonder why. What's making me think this and you think that? Then we have the beginning of a conversation. So it's a way, how do we approach the fact that we have quote unquote different facts or different things we believe to be facts, right? That's.
Agree. I'm debating, I think maybe what I should do is read the next excerpt because it speaks to this directly. And then maybe we have a little bit more discussion.
Yes.
I called this one the biggest lesson. Jean and I had a significant disagreement because we each believed a version of the facts that was not entirely accurate. The details of the conflict do not bear retelling, but the resulting method of resolving the conflict is worth sharing. Each of our beliefs about the other contained a grain of accuracy, what could be verified. But the rest of what we each believed was a story about the facts and a misrepresentation and misinterpretation of both the intentions and the actions of the other. We took a break from our work together when the conflict surfaced. The conflict was too big for either of us to hold and keep working. It was Gene who called to say that he wanted to resume our work but did not know how. All I knew was that I wanted some kind of balance in the resolution of the situation. I had too much experience with so-called conflict resolution that produced seemingly endless tirades and accusations. I suggested we limit our exchange to one sentence each. Clarification was acceptable, but no paragraphs. He agreed. It took us many weeks of these exchanges before we came to a mutual understanding that worked for us both. This method for resolving conflict is something I believe has wider applications, so I presented it to the focusing community at the International Focusing Conference in Switzerland in 2013. The identity of my partner in developing the method was not revealed at the time. Since all this happened, I have studied interactive focusing substantially. I believe what Jean and I did relates to the kind of empathic listening Dr. Janet Klein put forward in interactive focusing. I'm inspired both by this experience with Gene and by my studies of Klein's work to bring to more people this kind of help for difficult interactions. And I'll say just two quick things, and then I would love to hear from you. The conflict that we got into had to do with what he and Mary asked me to do to help them with how they were living, how they were spending their money, and how they were handling their legal affairs. And I'll just give you a couple seconds to pause and contemplate what that entailed.
Hmm.
And I can tell you one thing. I had an investment advisor and an attorney and an accountant who were all well qualified and well reputed, who were ready to help them. And all I needed was a letter that said that they could talk to me, not do anything, not let me spend their money, not nothing, no actions, but just that people could talk to me about the Gendlin's business, that the Gendlins said that I was authorized. And Gene wouldn't sign that letter. And it was because of something deep in Gene that if you knew him at all, you knew that he had a distrust of the state, of large organizations, of anything controlling. So I was never able to really help them, but I got involved in one aspect of their living. And I guess the thing to say to keep confident is it got misreported to them by somebody else. And Gene had this difficult reaction to it that he brought to me, and that was the conflict. So it was deeply personal, and basically he fired me. He said, I can't work with you anymore. But then he came back, which is, to me, is one of the biggest miracles, that something in him changed and he was able to come back. And that was what led to this one sentence. And the other thing I want to say is, since then, I have been working as hard as I can to spread interactive focusing, as some of you may know. Sandy Jahmi Burg has given me a home for what I do. And we have changes meetings for interactive focusing. There'll be a video workshop to learn the steps a little better. And I want to make sure people know how to do it. So, anybody have a question or a comment about all that? Thank you, Lucy.
Yeah, I could say something.
Please.
Just how important this sounds and feels in this moment where there's so much division in the world, so many different facts, different ways of holding the same facts or different facts. And I'm just starting to see the very, very first signs of some people online starting to be curious, be interested about what's going on. I guess the people that I've seen are people who would have voted some in the USA for the Democrats, and who are just a few starting to be curious about what happened with people voting for Trump, and then some people coming out and sharing their experiences of why they did that. And it just feels like, yeah, this is such an important moment to find ways to stop othering each other. And kind of, it feels like when we're doing this othering of one another on this bigger scale, or kind of out there in the world as well as in our homes, it's now feeling to me like we're kind of doing for free the work of just a very few people in positions of power who, you know, it feels to me like there's this kind of divide and conquer strategy that's working very well. And when we do that with each other, we're actually just doing the work for free that's actually creating so much division in our societies instead of us coming together and working together.
I understand there are books that are written about what you've just said. that there is something large afoot, and to be awake to recognize it and to respond to it. Whoops. Why did the screen do that? Oh, there's Lucy. It just rearranged everybody. You know, as I listened to you, Lucy, the word that bubbled up in me was the word trust. I'm not sure we talk about it enough. But that, for me, is a lot of what underlies this. And I remember that when Gene called me up to tell me he was, firing me, what he said to me was, I don't trust you anymore. And that was the first moment that word had been used. We had never talked about the trust that had to be there. I guess it was implied as I worked with the master of the implicit, but we had never discussed it. But he was able to say emphatically that it had been broken. And then, and I don't even know if I thought about this until today, we rebuilt it through that process that we engaged in. And I think as I listen to you, that's what I'm hearing is we don't trust each other. And it's because perhaps we're receiving messages about the other. And then what happens inside is a breaking of trust. And so the real question is, how do we rebuild trust? Wow. Charles, you had something to say?
I just wanted to respond to Lucy, but now that you said that, that seems so crucial. How we build trust, and I notice it in myself. People come to me and tell me all these stories, and I start to think, oh, that's probably a conspiracy theory, and I find it very hard to listen to say, well, maybe it isn't, maybe it isn't. I have to hold back a little bit. My immediate reaction, that's a conspiracy theory. It might be. I mean, there are these baseless theories. But the other point is that I have a number of clients who voted for Trump, and we have conversations. And one thing that Lucy said was I say, well, this is keeping us divided. And that works to the advantage of certain people that neither of us want to have controlling us necessarily. And there's usually a common ground there. Oh, they call it the hidden state. I might call it capitalist, multi-billionaires or whatever. But we can agree that this state of division and us fighting each other really doesn't work to the advantage of either of us. That gives us some common ground for at least saying that we have some shared interest in trying to understand each other. And I find that a good starting point. But I think your question, it goes even deeper, Barbara, about the question of broken trust. We talk about political divide and polarization, but maybe we should be talking about broken trust. And I'll leave it at that.
What I found in this one sentence exchange with Gene was that one of us would say something like, you did this or you said this. And that was all you got, because you only got one sentence. And then the other one got the chance to say either, well, that wasn't exactly what I said, here's what I actually said. Because in some parts of this conflict, there were other people talking to Gene. There wasn't anybody else talking to me, but he was getting versions of this from some other people. And I got to say, well, this is what I actually said. Or the other person got to say, this is what I intended. And whatever it was that had been said or done that had caused the so-called offense got contextualized in a different way than what the other person was thinking, was believing. And because it was just one sentence, it created the space to be able to consider what you were hearing from the other person. You weren't, and the other thing I think we were both inherently good at, because Gene is Gene and I'm a focuser, was not jumping to what am I going to answer to that person when he's done speaking. So we were able to pause, take in what we had heard about the other person's intention or the other person's real meaning. And I think that was what helped us rebuild the trust, because we went on to work for some months after that. Okay, so I'm at a decision point here. The time is okay. I would like to offer you about 15 minutes in breakout rooms. And Christine, I was thinking, we're not going to put them in the breakout rooms yet, but I was thinking of maybe 3 people per room. And if you have 15 minutes in a room, you have about 5 minutes each. And what I was going to do was offer an attunement after I read this last excerpt, but I'm thinking maybe the excerpt might be the attunement itself. The last excerpt was about Gene's big topic, which was, he liked to call it how to create a buzz for focusing. He also liked the marketing term sticky, how to make focusing sticky. And we talked about this at great length. We came up with a bunch of ideas and plans. One of his big things was you had to get focusing in front of national associations. So, for example, if you teach focusing to teachers, they'll use it for themselves. They might use it in their classrooms, but that's where it ends. But if you teach focusing to a school superintendent, then that school superintendent might trickle it down into his or her entire school network. And if you teach it to the National Association of School Superintendents, then you've got stickiness. That was his theory. And I don't think he was wrong. I think he was right. I think that it's going to require a lot of resources to make something like that happen, because I probably ought to write up my experience with New Jersey. It didn't. I couldn't make it work. But I still don't think he's wrong. So I wrote about this in the memoir, and I'd like to read that to you. But I think if I read that to you and I offer you the questions I had in mind for you to consider in a breakout room, I don't have to go through a whole attunement, and that'll keep us on time. So this is creating a buzz about focusing. Gene understood that the term focusing, as it means the practice he developed, had and still has a troubled place in the vernacular. He said to me on more than one occasion that focusing did not have to be called focusing. We could call it something meaningful to any audience, but whatever word or words we used should inspire people to embrace the practice. He further believed that a professional public buzz about focusing could cure a lot of ills for TFI and the global focusing community. He never said he had a clue how to do it, although he did offer that calling it focusing was part of the problem, as the word itself has public meanings that confuse the buzz. Since the time we had these conversations, I have observed many offerings that use different, hopefully attractive language to describe what will be delivered, presumably in the hopes of attracting audiences with the needs that these services, based in focusing, can provide. It raises another in a seemingly endless string of interesting questions. How can one know if focusing has taken hold, generated buzz, or become sticky if it is not called focusing? Does that matter? Gene said he liked the idea of stickiness. This is a concept marketing professionals use to describe the process that makes a product take hold in the minds of the target population. Stickiness is a good thing if what you are selling is beneficial. How to make focusing stick was what he and I were all about. Gene asked an important question, which I will paraphrase here. Where we know focusing will make the whole thing better in any given field, how do we attract, motivate, support, and empower enough people to accomplish the task, especially since We believe we cannot provide anything like adequate compensation. And since the kind of people attracted to focusing often lack the business acumen essential to success. A long-winded question for sure, but it goes straight to the heart of the difficulties of marketing focusing. I encountered several people who espoused the view that marketing was something ethically suspect. Personally, I wonder if principles, concepts, and practices of marketing eluded at least some of them, and it was easier to challenge the ethics of the profession than it was to dive in, learn more, and apply what one has learned. There is much to be learned, and there are many benefits to running a carefully considered and constructed marketing campaign. Might focusing have thrived more than it does? Gene had a mentality of, if we build it, they will come. Although his version seemed more like, if we tell them about it, they will want to have it for their own. In my opinion, Gene's mentality was not wrong, but for all his creativity, for all he created an entire philosophy and a human development practice, unique among the massive ideas. For all that, his vision about making focusing stick seemed limited. He had the futuristic ability to see the world differently, with focusing embedded in many environments. But he seemed to become disheartened, even resistant, when talk turned to how to achieve that. Anybody care to share something that surprised them?
Changed my life. I'm now changing careers from psychologist to professional focusing marketer.
Oh.
I got very excited and stimulated.
Okay, that is at the top of my never expected to hear that list.
And I never wondered, I always wondered, Liz, are you sarcastic or do you mean it?
I'm always both, Charles. Why pick one when you can do both at the same time?
All right, got it. Good
No, I
answer.
was thinking about, yes, it's impossible to bring a program like focusing to a school system. But on the other pole, you have somebody like Ann Weiser Cornell, who probably hired professionals, who has a website that looks like she's selling you mortgages. And just like any ad or marketing campaign, it exactly parallels, selling cars or something. No, that's a bad example. What she's selling is the relieving of suffering. She'll say, do you have a problem that you just can't solve? Are you suffering from, it could be for eczema cream, but it's, but she won't tell you the answer until you scroll some more. Do you find it? You have to keep scrolling. She builds up the tension. I'm sure she paid somebody to do this. I can't believe, it's a profession, and then finally, this is the answer. And then she gives things like conflicts, special names, tangles. So that's another thing you talked about, that focusing, it's too generic. It's about ADHD. It's about all, right? Then focusing is hard if you actually try. What is a felt sense? What is a body? You have to make it easy. You have, so there are these principles. If we had, MBAs instead of whatever our degrees are, this would be simple stuff to us, right? But we're just not in that world. Artists hire representatives to bring their work to the galleries. They don't necessarily do it themselves. So I think that anyway, I decided that that's going to be my new profession in my retirement.
Liz, I want to get to know you much better. You just said it all brilliantly. I will tell you, because in a moment of the most perfect casting I've ever experienced, Robert Lee and Ann Weiser Cornell were my certification team when I went to the week-long. And somewhere in that process, Ann explained that indeed it was a marketing professional that she teamed up with in some way. And he taught her, you ask 3 questions that get at the heart of what people want and need. And then your answer is, and I've got the answer for you, whatever your product is. And it was, they were talking about focusing, of course. I can't tell you how many people I've talked that to. And in fact, it's what inspired the questions I asked you today, is what need does focusing fulfill? What does it offer that somebody wants? So yeah, you've got it exactly right. I'm not going to spend much more of my wild and precious life on the question of why so few people in the focusing community want to get into marketing or want to find someone who is, to your point, partner with someone who is an expert in it. And whether that means they hire a consultant or a service, or they make friends with somebody, or they buy somebody coffee, doesn't matter. But this business of seeing marketing as something evil is just, I don't understand, but then I operate in a whole different headspace than a lot of people. So thank you very much for that. Wow.
I think it's, most of us operate in a different headspace, but then we're frustrated.
Mm.
It's hard to sell an idea. It's hard to sell an idea that, as people have pointed out, is associated with other things such as ADHD. Focusing is too common a word in the language and means too many things. And then also when you try to do it, it's often very difficult. You don't know what a felt sense really is.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another, I think, an idea there is that you have to make it easier.
Well, and there are a lot of us in our community who are very attached to focusing. It has to be focusing. Well, okay. And I don't disagree with that because of brand name recognition. If you stop calling it focusing, then how in the world can you figure out if that's what people are learning? It's a problem. I would love to see a group form that wanted to say something wise about this.
Barbara, I just have to interrupt. Liz, you did such a great job of summarizing Ann Weiser Cornell's program. And here we are with Kevin in Ireland, who would be, in my mind, the second person who is most organized, maybe in spite of himself, in terms of people knowing whole body focusing and commitment to it and teaching it. And I'd love to hear from you, Kevin, if that's not too intrusive.
It takes me a while for that question to sink in and make an answer.
Well, I work closely with Kevin, and I'd like to respond to that. And one of the ways that we not market, but share whole body focusing is there's 2 different online products. I have a blog. One of the other group has a informational website about focusing. What I find with the blog is it tells me who looks at this blog and where are they from. And there are people from at least 60 countries that read the blog, that read 5 or 6 of the articles on the blog on a regular basis. And basically what we do is share our work with people. And that gets somehow into Pakistan, into Afghanistan, into China, into all places in South America. I'm surprised. I don't do any work. I don't try to do that. It just happens because what we do is so good. And people who experience it share it with other people, that we're known, but we don't have any way to quantify that. It's that we don't really know how many people focus. And that's the case with like a whole body. Kevin's not a marketer, but this concept is spread all over the world.
Yes.
Diana, you're maybe giving an example of attraction.
Yes.
That there's something about putting it out and whatever that energy, frequency, whatever, that people are picking that up and are coming in that way. And that's working out successfully.
So if there were a group taking up this question, one of the things they might do is a case study of how whole body focusing spreads so fluidly around the world. I also want to say 2 people have their hands raised, and we have about 4 minutes left, and I have 2 more things to say. So Charles and Nashira, if we can hear you quickly, because I will
Okay.
say my poem and I will say my closing.
Well, I can say mine very quickly. I think that maybe we should. Problem is, there's so much marketing happens in our society that is manipulative. So we need to. I think I would like to break the word connecting with people and their needs. Prefers the word marketing is very loaded, unfortunately, and Anne talks about marketing in a way that meets person's need. That means listening, empathy. That all becomes part of Amoka, but that's a connecting process. And yeah, and I think that's in a sense, without consciously, Diane is talking about that they're connecting with people and it's meeting their needs. And so that works. But if we're trying to push something on people, sell them a product, they get suspicious, and rightfully so.
Absolutely. And there's nothing I will ever say that has to do with focusing on anybody, because I know that doesn't work. Nashira, I see you put your hand down, but was there something you wanted to?
I was just going to share what Charles had put in the chat, which was, I felt like it was in response to after Liz spoke about the procedure of the website. To me, when I see websites like that, there is like a fear that kind of comes. Those questions, do you have this problem? Do you have that? Go scroll. There's something when I get there that stops, that I'm like, oh no, they're trying to do something to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when Charles put in the chat the connecting piece, I just thought that was nice.
I am reminded of what Jean said about the Myers-Briggs assessment. The hubris to think that the variety and complexity of humanity could be reduced to 16 buckets. And I think the most important idea is that we never want to think that there's one approach that will work for all people. We want to connect with people and find out what can they use, what will help them, what do they want, not what do we have to push into their laps. I would like to bring this to a close with 3 things: my appreciation, the last excerpt, which I would dearly like to read, it's not that long, and the poem that my friend wrote especially for this occasion. And I know you all saw it in the invitation, but I've been waiting to read it out loud to you.
Oh, good. We want that.
I would like to thank Helpers, Lynn, and your team for this opportunity. This is incredible. I said in the beginning, it took me 12 years to get here, and it's absolutely a labor of love. And to be honored in this space is just amazing to me. Of course,
We
I
want you to come back.
Wow. I want to thank my poet, Anne, who's here in spirit. And I want to thank my other editor, Lisa, publicly. She has helped me get much more than this memoir out. And I want to thank Ann Weiser Cornell and Peter Afford for the wonderful reviews that they gave of the memoir. And there are lovely comments on YouTube. And this has been just cool. And I want to especially thank Sandy Jahmi Burg, because she has given my work a home on her Learn Focusing website. And that is, as they say, all there is to marketing. I have a place I can point you to and say, there's where it is. So in closing, it's time to bring this to a close. As I have said before, my fondest hope is that readers will find in this work some inspiration to move one of their own ideas forward, or to take one of Gene's ideas and actualize it. Gene was always clear that he wanted to make focusing as freely available as possible. There is, of course, an inherent conflict because people must make a living. I believe Gene would be perfectly happy to see people make a living from the implementation of any of his ideas. I believe that is the biggest reason he never wanted to trademark focusing or any other terminology that would describe the method that could be trademarked, so that it could be used as widely as possible. Others who spent more time with him than me could likely speak in more detail to that point. The conclusion of this memoir is taken from the movie Toy Story, To Infinity and Beyond. The ideas Gene and I discussed, organized, pored over, planned, schemed, and dreamed can take us to wonderful and in many cases unimagined places, infinity and beyond. For as long as I live, I will be grateful for all the time with Gene, the good, the bad, the challenging, and the inspiring. With this memoir, I hope that the ideas he and I discussed will take on a life of their own, maybe even long after my life is over. And this is my friend's poem, which is entitled Gendlin. The blonde lady blinks. The man slowly unfolds a transatlantic timetable. The train conductor sighs. Winter 1938, and the doctor of chemistry guides wife and child onto narrow footpaths, careening trolleys, and crowded double-deckers, far from their Vienna home, to Holland, where no blood-red tulip yet blooms. Let's go this way. We cannot stay here. Finish your bread. His son eyes officers in black-belted uniforms that his father's certitude avoids, and bystanders, shopkeepers, tellers, seemingly harmless, but not. Poppy, how do you know? Der Sinn. A radiant map nudges this way, not that. Trust the bareheaded elder, not the aproned girl. Eugene, listen to me. You must discover your cartography. The boy will look back to that moment on the immaculate desk of the SS Paris, and he will feel loved, safe, his father patting his shoulder, his mother's nod. 3 enchanted by the infinite, artful horizon and beyond, unseen, a new world, the felt sense.
Wow. Oh, thank you. That answers Dorothy's question also. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And thank all of you. And we'll have a new kind of marketing now that isn't called marketing. Bye-bye now. See you next week.
Hi, everybody.